Hey man, there's a harsh truth most men don't want to face. The more you explain yourself to a woman, the less she respects you. Men are conditioned to believe that if they just communicate enough, if they explain their intentions, their feelings and their actions, then she'll finally understand and value them. But women don't operate on explanations, they operate on perception. And every time you explain yourself, you confirm one thing in her mind, that you're seeking her approval, that you need her to validate your actions, that you're insecure about your decisions, and nothing drains a woman's respect faster than realizing a man cannot stand by what he says and does without begging her to understand it. When you explain yourself, you think you're providing clarity, but what she hears is weakness. She doesn't hear your reasoning, she hears your insecurity. She doesn't see your logic, she sees your doubt. Because the man who knows who he is doesn't feel the need to explain it. He doesn't feel the urge to justify his choices. He simply acts, speaks, and moves forward. And that's what makes him attractive. Women test men to see if they'll bend, and one of the most common traps is making you feel like you owe her an explanation for every word you speak or every decision you make. The man who explains falls into that trap. The man who doesn't explain, he passes it effortlessly, and her respect for him grows. The hidden dynamic here is that explaining yourself shifts the power dynamic in her favor. When you explain, you place her in the position of judge, you're on trial, and she's the jury deciding if your reasoning is good enough. You've given her control over your decisions, even if she never earned it, and once she senses that control, she'll use it subtly at first, then overtly. She'll start demanding more explanations, more justifications, more emotional confessions, and each time you give them, you shrink in her eyes. Because women don't want to lead, no matter what they say. They want to feel the strength of a man who leads himself without apology. By explaining yourself, you rob her of that feeling. Think about it. When has a woman ever truly respected the man who endlessly explained himself? She might nod, she might listen, she might even say she understands, but inside, her attraction is dying. She can't admire what she feels she can control. She can't respect what bends to her approval. This is why the men who remain calm, stoic, and unbothered by her questions are the ones she secretly obsesses over. The man who doesn't explain, who doesn't justify, who doesn't bend his frame to make her comfortable, that's the man who lingers in her mind long after he's gone. Because his silence is strength, and his strength is unforgettable. It's not that you should never speak to her, never share your thoughts, or never let her into your world. The difference lies in intent. Are you speaking because you want to share, or are you speaking because you feel pressured to justify yourself? Women can sense the difference instantly. A man who shares from abundance, who speaks because he chooses to, not because he feels he must, radiates confidence. A man who explains from scarcity, who speaks because he fears losing her, if she misunderstands, radiates weakness. And women are hardwired to respect confidence and despise weakness. That's why she'll never respect the man who explains himself. When you fall into the habit of explaining yourself, what you're really doing is putting her above you in the hierarchy of the relationship. You're unconsciously admitting that her approval is more important than your own conviction. You're saying, I know what I did, but I need you to validate it before I can feel secure. That dynamic kills attraction because it strips away the polarity that fuels it. She doesn't want to mother you, she doesn't want to babysit your insecurities, and she certainly doesn't want to feel like she's the one in charge of deciding if you're right or wrong. A man who explains himself too much trains her to see him as beneath her, and once she sees you that way, respect is gone, and once respect is gone, love doesn't last. Women test men constantly, not to hear explanations, but to feel the strength behind his actions. When she challenges you, she's not always looking for details or long-winded speeches, she's looking for your composure. She wants to see if you can hold steady under pressure, if you can remain calm when she throws doubt at you. And the man who explains himself is the man who fails that test, because instead of standing firm, he scrambles to defend himself. He overtalks, he overshares, he makes excuses. She may listen on the surface, but underneath, her attraction is slipping away, because to her, every word you use to justify yourself is proof that you're shaken. The less you say, the stronger you look. There's also a deeper layer. The man who explains himself reveals his frame is fragile. A strong frame is built on certainty. It doesn't bend under pressure, it doesn't collapse when challenged, and it doesn't seek outside validation to survive. A fragile frame, on the other hand, constantly seeks reassurance. It explains, it over-explains, it pleads to be understood. And women don't just notice this, they feel it. They feel the difference between a man who knows himself and a man who needs her to confirm who he is. The former sparks admiration and attraction, the latter sparks contempt. That's why explaining yourself is more than just words, it's the exposure of your inner frame. Look at the men women chase and obsess over. Are they the ones who explain every decision, every mood, every silence? No, they are the men who move without apology. They say what they mean and let their actions stand on their own. They don't backtrack, they don't over-clarify, they don't bend their truth to soften her emotions. And this is what makes them magnetic, because women, even if they argue, secretly crave that kind of immovable energy. They crave a man who stands firm, who doesn't bend under questioning. That energy makes them feel safe, even if it frustrates them in the moment. The man who explains himself might feel safe logically, but emotionally, he feels weak. And women live in emotion, not logic. The trap most men fall into is thinking that explaining themselves will stop conflict. They believe that if they just talk enough, the tension will go away. But the opposite happens. Over-explaining only fuels more conflict because it signals that you're willing to be pulled into endless debates and emotional spirals. Women don't respect men who talk themselves in circles. They respect the man who cuts through noise with calm silence, decisive words and actions that don't need justification. Conflict is never ended with explanations, it's ended with strength, and strength is often silent. The less you explain, the more she feels your conviction. The more you explain, the more she feels your weakness. Silence is one of the most underrated weapons a man can use, especially in the emotional battlefield of relationships. When she tests you, challenges you, or even accuses you of something you know doesn't require justification, silence says more than 1,000 explanations ever could. Silence communicates self-control, confidence, and composure. It shows her that you're not shaken, that you're not desperate to win her approval, and that you're comfortable letting her sit with her own thoughts. This unsettles her in a way words never can, because she expects you to defend yourself like every other man she's dealt with. But when you don't, when you simply look at her with calm presence, you flip the script. You remind her that respect isn't earned by talking, it's earned by standing firm. Restraint builds mystery, and mystery is one of the strongest fuels of attraction. When you constantly explain yourself, you strip away every layer of curiosity she has about you. She knows exactly why you did what you did, she knows exactly what you were thinking, and she knows exactly how you feel. But the man who doesn't over-explain keeps her guessing. She wonders why he acted that way, why he hasn't justified himself, why he seems unbothered by her challenges. That wondering keeps you in her head far longer than words ever could. Explanations end the story, restraint extends it, and it's in that extension, in that curiosity, where desire grows. Explaining yourself drains your power because it makes you reactive instead of proactive. The moment you explain, you've already given her the lead. She speaks, you respond. She questions, you answer. She challenges, you justify. You've entered her frame and abandoned your own. And once you're inside her frame, you can never win, because she's dictating the rules of the game. That's why arguments with women often spiral endlessly. They're not looking for logic, they're looking for strength. And the more you explain, the more you lose both the argument and her respect. A man who does less, who stays calm and grounded, never falls into that spiral. He doesn't play in her frame, he forces her to come to his. Think of the most charismatic, respected leaders throughout history. Were they men who explained themselves endlessly, apologizing for every decision? Or were they men who spoke with brevity, with conviction, and with finality? The latter, always. Because people don't follow explanations, they follow certainty. And women are no different. They may argue, they may protest, but deep down, they respect the man who doesn't feel the need to justify himself at every turn. They respect the man who moves forward decisively, even if they don't fully understand him in the moment. Explaining tries to win her mind. Silence wins her respect. Over time, explaining yourself erodes not just her respect, but your own self-image. Every time you bend to justify, you chip away at your own confidence. You start to believe that your decisions aren't valid unless she approves them. You stop trusting your instincts and start waiting for her feedback. And the tragedy is that this spiral doesn't make her love you more. It makes her love you less, because what she truly wanted all along wasn't your words, but your strength. She wanted a man who didn't collapse under pressure, a man who could stand tall even when she tried to knock him off balance. By explaining yourself, you rob her of that gift. By standing firm, you give it to her, whether she realizes it or not. Over-explaining creates emotional exhaustion, not only for you, but for her as well. Every time you defend yourself with a flood of words, you turn what could have been a small disagreement into a draining back and forth. She tunes out halfway through, because women aren't wired to be swayed by logic in moments of emotional charge. What she remembers isn't the content of your explanations, it's the vibe behind them. And if that vibe is needy, apologetic, or desperate to be understood, she registers it as weakness. This is why men who over-explain often feel like their words never land. They don't land because she's not listening to logic, she's feeling the energy. And the energy of explaining yourself is almost always one of submission. Women instinctively test boundaries. They test to see if you'll hold your ground, or if you'll bend to their emotions. These tests are not always malicious. They're built into the way female psychology seeks security. A woman doesn't want to consciously destroy her respect for you, but she will subconsciously push until she finds the edge of your strength. And every time you explain yourself, every time you justify instead of simply standing on your choices, you fail that test. She feels it. She might not say it out loud, but she feels the subtle disappointment of realizing you're not as unshakable as she hoped. The man who passes those tests isn't the one who gives the perfect speech. It's the one who barely says a word and yet refuses to move. Quiet conviction is the ultimate masculine power. It's not about yelling, it's not about dominance, and it's not about arrogance. It's about the unshakable belief in your own decisions. It's about moving through the world with the confidence that you don't need external validation to know you're right. Women are drawn to this because it signals strength. It signals that if the world collapses tomorrow, you won't. That if chaos erupts, you'll remain calm. And she feels that through your silence more than she ever will through your explanations. A man who explains himself endlessly reveals uncertainty. A man who says little and stays grounded radiates certainty. And certainty is magnetic. The trap is thinking that by not explaining yourself, you'll appear cold or detached. But that's not the case. If anything, it makes you appear composed and intentional. Because when you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you explain less, your decisions feel more deliberate. She realizes that if you do choose to share something, it's because you mean it, not because you're scrambling for approval. And that contrast makes her pay more attention, not less. Men who explain themselves endlessly dilute their impact. Men who don't explain much amplify it. Less truly becomes more, because scarcity makes words and actions valuable. At its core, explaining yourself too much is a symptom of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing her, fear of not being enough. But women don't fall in love with fear, they fall in love with power. They don't respect the man who bends under the weight of those fears. They respect the man who rises above them, and the way you rise above is by letting go of the need to always be understood. You don't need her to see your logic. You don't need her to validate your reasons. You simply need to know deep in your bones that you stand by what you do. That kind of conviction is rare, and because it's rare, it's irresistible. Restraint flips attraction in ways most men can't comprehend, because they've been programmed to believe that communication fixes everything. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Women don't fall for the man who explains. They fall for the man who remains unshaken while she storms. When you stop over-explaining, when you hold your silence instead of spilling justifications, you create a polarity she can't resist. That restraint communicates that your worth is not up for debate. It tells her that she can question you, she can test you, she can even get emotional, but she cannot move you. And when a woman realizes she can't move you, she begins to revolve around you instead. That shift is the moment attraction deepens and respect solidifies. Explanations, in truth, are traps. They sound noble, they sound responsible, but they secretly put you in a weak position every single time. A woman might push for explanations because she wants to feel out your resolve, but when you give her long-winded justifications, she stops listening to the content and starts feeling the weakness underneath it. The more you explain, the more she pushes, because she senses there's no end. What she's really doing is seeing how far she can pull you away from your center. And if you allow that, she loses respect, because deep down, she doesn't want to lead. She wants to feel the steadiness of a man who doesn't get dragged into emotional spirals. The man who doesn't explain himself becomes unforgettable because he leaves her in the tension of curiosity. He doesn't spell everything out, he doesn't beg to be understood, and he doesn't dilute his actions with over-explaining. Instead, he lets her sit with the silence, forcing her to interpret it herself. And women can't help but obsess over what they can't fully understand. They replay it in their minds, wondering what you meant, why you didn't justify yourself, and why you seem so certain. That mental replay keeps you alive in her thoughts far longer than words ever could. Explanation kills mystery, restraint builds it, and mystery is the seed of obsession. Over time, the man who resists explaining himself establishes a foundation of respect that only grows stronger. She learns that when he speaks, he means it. She learns that when he acts, there's no hidden insecurity behind it. She learns that his conviction isn't fragile, it's rooted deep. And that realization changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. She no longer looks at him as someone she can sway with pressure. She sees him as an anchor, solid, immovable, dependable. That doesn't mean she'll stop testing, because tests are instinctual, but it does mean that she'll respect him more with each one he passes. And respect more than love is the true foundation of lasting attraction. The truth is simple but brutal. She will never respect the man who explains himself, because explaining is submission in disguise. It signals doubt, fear, and the need for external approval. And women are not drawn to doubt, they're drawn to certainty. They don't admire the man who bends, they admire the man who stands tall, no matter the storm. So stop trying to make her understand you. Stop begging her to validate your choices. Stop handing away your power with endless justifications. Say what you mean, do what you decide, and let your actions stand. Because the man who doesn't explain himself becomes the man she can't forget. The man who commands her respect without ever asking for it.